Right, good afternoon everyone. I make it 3:30 and we are live and broadcasting. Can I welcome everybody, but we'll start with apologies.
I have apologies, Chairman, from Charlotte Atkins, Bernard Peters, Jill Heath, Jeremy Pert, and then from Stoke-on-Trent City Council, who've been invited as observers, Carl Edwards, Lorraine Beermore, and Lillian Dodd.
Thank you. Any other apologies? I will point out that you can't see it on your screen above me, but I can see on my screen that we have some people who are attending virtually, so we will have a few other people as well. We've got Cheryl Gerard from Stoke-on-Trent, Stephen Funnell from Stoke-on-Trent, possibly Sheena McKiernan from East Staffordshire Borough Council as a borough representative, and as a Tamworth Borough Council representative, Simon Goodall. So we're something of a hybrid meeting today. Okay, that takes us to item 2. Are there any declarations of interest anybody would need to raise? Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am a member of the Staffs and Stoke LEP, so I'll have to declare an interest and leave the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you for your attendance. Any other declarations of interest? No? Okay. That brings us to item 3, which is the scrutiny of the Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire Local Enterprise Partnership 2021. And we have 3 people representing the LEP with us. I think it says on the screen that we've got Alan Rogers, who's the chairman. We've also got Anne Boyd, who's the chief executive, and Simon Labour-White, who's financial input. Okay, so welcome aboard to you, and I believe you've got this report to click through, so can I leave it to you?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you everyone for taking the time to see us this afternoon. And I'll just get into our presentation. I'll talk to you about the LEP, and then I'll leave time at the end for plenty of questions. So yeah, just to give you an overview of what's been happening around the LEP for the last year, but I'll start to introduce kind of who the LEP is, what we've been doing, and I'll get into some detail on what's been happening in the last year. So as we've already said, I'm the chair of Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. I'm a resident of Stafford, and I'm also a local business owner. And this is something I do as part of my voluntary activities. And I'm joined today by Simon, who's our Section 151 officer, and Anne, who's our chief exec as well. So in terms of what the scrutiny session is about today, it's for us to tell you about the work that we've been doing. It's for you to help hold us to account for the delivery of the outputs and the outcomes that we've been delivering during 2021, but also to consider recommendations for the future delivery of economic growth in our area, particularly in regard to the changing national landscape that's happening at the moment, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And also there is a mandatory requirement as part of our assurance framework and as part of annual performance reviews, which are conducted by the CLGU, which is the City and Local Growth Unit, as part of BASE and MHCLG, to make sure that we are scrutinised annually as well. So we're complying with that requirement as well. So in terms of the LEP, in a sentence, that's what we do. We bridge the business and local authorities to drive economic growth in our geographic area. So that's the City of Stoke-on-Trent and the County of Staffordshire, and raise skill levels to drive further economic output. So that's our purpose, that's our raison d'etre. And then in terms of the board, the LEP is run by an executive board, of which there are 18 board members, 18 board member positions rather. We currently have 15 of those in post, and I'll explain to you shortly why the other 3 are currently vacant. We have interviewed for those other private sector board members, and again, the way the board membership is made up is there is 2/3 is from the private sector, 1/3 is from local authorities, which creates 12 private sector board members. And those private sector board members include a range of organisations, which will be such as the chambers, the universities, so both Keele and Staffs Uni sits on the board, their vice-chancellors, but also local business leaders as well. And senior local business leaders make up the remaining 12 seats, and then the other 6 seats are made up with a seat for the for the 2 Tier 1 authorities in the area, for 1 for the county, 1 for the city, and then 4 districts. And our districts operate a system of alternate membership, so when one's not available, another one will substitute, and then we will rotate as well. So that's our board, and as I said, we are looking to appoint the other member, the other post in time, but I'll explain to you kind of why we haven't done that yet and what the timescales, what's driving the timescale behind that. In terms of our strategy, LEPs were formed around 10 years ago as part of a Heseltine review, and we've been in that time responding to changes nationally and locally. Our initial strategy document was called the SEP, and that was published and refreshed rather in 2018. And then the follow-on to that was part of Minister Simon Clarke's agenda in Bays to create the National Industrial Strategy. At that time, LEPs were charged to create a localised version, which took the building blocks nationally to create a local version, and we delivered that successfully in March 2020. And that was just as we went into the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, the LEP's been very active, chairing our COVID-19 task force, working with local authorities and with ministers to coordinate some of the effort and do some kind of, for want of better terms, sanity checking around ideas that have been coming through and how we would support the economy locally. So we've been very active during COVID. Coordinating partners locally and supporting the government. And then in March 2021, the government announced that the industrial strategy was to be replaced with the plan for growth. And at the same time, they also announced a national review of LEPs. So we had a review in 2019, if I remember correctly. And this LEP went through significant change as part of that. And then in 2021, there was another review announced, and that review currently hasn't concluded. So in terms of the LEP review, it's been changing shape continuously over the last year. There was going to be a LEP review and a paper around various papers that were going to publish the outcome of the review. The latest vehicle for that is actually going to be the Levelling Up White Paper. And in terms of the LEP review, it focused on kind of 3 key things about LEPs. So their form, so how they would be structured, how they'll be governed, and the role they might take. So in the terms of their function, what role they'll play, and then the geography. And then for this area, our geography is the city of Stoke-on-Trent and the county of Staffordshire. As the next bullet says, there's been many times when we've been the review was meant to conclude and that we're meant to publish results, and obviously with the changing of ministers in MHCLG and Bays, that has led to multiple delays, and then obviously the restructuring of MHCLG to become LUG as a department has also led to further delays. So we're expecting the Levelling Up paper at some point imminently, and we believe that will, we're being led to believe that will give some building blocks for us to build on in terms of the future of where LEPs will go. As a LEP, we're preparing for everything. So we have thought about every scenario. So we're making sure that the LEP is structured and organised in an orderly manner, which would mean that we are able to pivot and fulfil our new role, or we'll be able to hand over our functions to other local bodies if necessary. But we are continuing to deliver our current obligations and our current programmes, and make sure that all of our current contractual commitments are met, and also make sure that we comply with all assurance frameworks, and that we have successful annual performance reviews with the CLGU unit as well. We're working closely with local leaders to make sure that the future shape of partnership working works well around here, and that we're best able to support that in whatever way we are required. In terms of governance, as I said on probably the 3rd slide, our structure is that we have an exec board. They're the main decision-making body. There are delegated groups with delegated authority, but they all roll up to the exec board, and they report on a monthly basis into that as well. We have 10 board meetings a year, so we take summer off and we take January off, but we meet very frequently. As I said, we currently have vacancies on the exec board, and we are maintaining those as vacancies due to let review. We're cautious to make sure that we don't waste people's time and engage them in something that may or may not be fruitful. And once the let review is concluded, then we'll look to press on with appointing those directors to those vacant board positions. But at the moment, we decided to keep those open rather than engage members of the public and business leaders locally until we know what we're going to be doing. The next group then is our Strategic Programme Management Group. So they do have delegated powers and they oversee the delivery of our main programmes. I will talk to you about a couple of those programmes in a second. We have the Audit and Finance Committee. Again, they have delegated powers from an audit and finance perspective, and they also oversee our risk and financial management, and that gets reported back monthly as well. And then we've historically had subgroups. So these were thematic groups that we derived from our local industrial strategy, and they were developing our strategic threads for investment across the area. We've put those on hold as part of the review, and we will look to either transition those to the plan for growth or something different post the review. And there are a number of other groups such as those thematic groups which are still operational, such as the Skills Advisory Panel, which is a programme we deliver on behalf of BAYS. DLEP complies nationally to a local assurance framework. We are financially solvent, and in light of the changes where government have initially withheld funding for 6 months, and then they've then provided all of our funding, we've remained solvent all the way through, and we've been managing our finances prudentially during that period. And as I said, we have an annual performance review with the Department for BAYS, and we have a good relationship, and we're continually managed by them as well. This subgroup is called the Cities and Local Growth Units. That's who we work with frequently. In terms of operational delivery, while there has been some uncertainty, we have carried on. So we developed a new delivery plan for 2020-2021, which should be in your packs. We continue to work with partners locally. We've been engaged in many programs locally, such as the We Are Staffordshire campaign, building the place brand, lots of work for advocacy. We are engaged with things like Midlands Engine. I'm on the Midlands Engine Connect strategy board. So we engage in lots of subnational bodies. We represent people like Midlands Engine at conferences and that kind of stuff as well. So we are very active locally and subnationally representing this area as well. We recently commissioned a review of our accountabilities to make sure that we understood all the things we were accountable for, all the money we were accountable for, and all the responsibilities we had. And we are working through that report now, and that'll be available at some point in the future. And then most recently, we've also taken lead to commission a situation report, and that's about providing a finger on the pulse type survey and provide good visibility for business needs around the area. So that's all about detailed intelligence directly from businesses that will allow all partners as part of the LEP to really understand what businesses require so that we can react and support businesses. And that will also help the LEP then have a hotline into business needs for developing our future strategy or whatever is required for the organisation in the future. And then one of our current duties that we're heavily involved in is ongoing programme management for existing programmes. The LEP has brought in hundreds of millions of pounds of investment into the local area over the last 10 years. And many of those programmes are still ongoing, and we provide oversight and management for many of those programmes as well from a financial perspective. Obviously, delivery is delivered by our partners. So from a programme management perspective, here's some of the funds that we've been responsible for. So the Local Growth Deal and the Getting Building Fund are the two most recent. And it was particularly pleasing for the Getting Building Fund that we got a significant allocation for our area of nearly £22 million. So that was disproportionately for our size of our area, and historically that was a really good allocation, which we were pleased about. And we've been managing those programs and delivering those, and that's been managed by the LEP's own program manager. There's also the City Deal, which is, as a fund, is managed by Stoke-on-Trent City Council and Kiel University, and again, oversight comes from our Strategic Programme Management Group. There are European funding streams, which are typically revenue-based, and again, there's documentation for you there. Those have been principally administered by the County Council and Stoke-on-Trent City Council, who've been managing that day to day. We have the Growing Places Fund, which is a loan fund. Again, there's detail in your appendices for you, and that's been managed by the County Council. The Ceramic Valley Enterprise Zone, which has been particularly successful in driving business development and growing lots of regional investment in Stoke, has been particularly successful, and that's managed by Stoke-on-Trent City Council. God, I've turned him into county then, that's a slip. And then the Growth Hub is a service which is contracted to the LEP by Bays for delivering business support services, and we're directly accountable for that, and that's a service we subcontract to the Chamber as well. But, and we've been doing lots of work recently to really strengthen the delivery, the performance of that contract and the governance as well, to make sure we get delivery for our businesses locally as well. There we go. So in terms of today, our recommendations are that members consider the documentation we've sent you in the appendices, so that you're able to ask us questions and hold us to account around our objectives for delivery in 2021. It is asked that you note that there is wider uncertainty regarding the future of LEPs. There's been lots of rumour and speculation in the press. Often that is at odds with what we're being told directly by ministers, but there is uncertainty currently. And also there will be lessons learned from our experiences that would help us shape the role of economic development in this area in the future as well. And how partnership working can be leveraged to improve that as well. And I think with that, Chair, in about 20 minutes, it's over to you, Chair, for questions, and I'm happy to take any questions from anybody about anything.
Okay, thanks, Alan, for that. We will take questions from the room if we can, but I've also had an indication already on the screen, so I'll try and keep a watch on this screen down here. If I'm not looking at you, it's because I'm trying to monitor what's happening in terms of other people indicating. Just for the sake of knowing what you know that we've seen, we members of the County Council have had 4 appendices circulated in advance of the meeting. We've had the delivery plan for 21-22. You mentioned the Getting Building Fund report for 21-22 we've got. The Local Growth Deal for 21-22, and also the LEP's ESIF programme, European Regional Development Fund. We've had those in advance. I'll take any questions that we have from whichever direction. The first one to indicate is Councillor Sheila McKiernan.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello, I can see yourself. I can't see the chair of the LEP.
Okay. Unfortunately, they're facing the other way, so you won't see them.
Oh, okay then. I had 2 questions, if that's okay. Oh, I can see you now. I'm Councillor Sheila McKiernan. I'm a rep for the SS LEP from East Staffs. I'm also a rep for the GBS LEP on their scrutiny committee. I would just like to know from East Staff's point of view what specifically is being done by the Stoke and Staffordshire LEP for East Staffordshire and the area, bearing in mind that we're on the edge of Derby. And so I know you have other edges as well, with Cheshire, for instance. But I read the same things I read that, GBS LEP is doing X, Y, and Z. I, read that Combined Authority is doing X, Y, Z. All seems to be around the same area, around the Branston interchange, for example. So can you just enlighten me as to what specifically you're doing with regards to jobs and growth?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor McKiernan. Are you happy to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course I am. So, yeah, I guess there's an element of some people are doing it and some people are talking about it. So we've been working very actively with e-staffs. We work with them frequently. We're engaged well with councillors over there, and specifically around investments. I think the biggest one is the recent investment we've made in Drakelow Park. So that's an interesting investment where we took some of our Getting Building Fund, and it's our single largest allocation of all of the Getting Building Fund, and we actually invested that, technically it's over the border in Derbyshire, but it will benefit Burton, and I think it's a good example where we as a LEP have always put the interest of the economy and interest of the people beyond things like boundaries and things like geography. And that's a significant investment to bring that brownfield site into use for housing and employment sites, and also will create a third bridge through Burton over the River Trent as well. So I think that's the strongest example, but we have been very active across various programmes in supporting some of the town redevelopment programmes, etc. as well. We're very actively engaged, so I think from our perspective, our style is to do things rather than necessarily be shouting about them.
Thank you. Thanks very much. What about skills and the young people? Are you doing anything with the college?
So we have been engaged with the college. I can't, off the top of my memory, think of any active programmes, but if you give me the courtesy to write back to you, then we'll produce you a list of things that we've been doing. But there are many. I just can't remember everything off the top of my head.
No, thank you very much. The other question I wanted to ask with my other hat on is about the governance. I'm Chair of Scrutiny of the GBS LEP, and we have meetings quarterly with all of the representatives from every district and borough and Metropolitan Council. I did ask this a year ago. I found it very difficult to actually break into this group. This is the first time I've actually managed to get to a meeting because somehow I didn't get an invitation last year. I do find it strange that scrutiny only occurs once a year. So could you again enlighten me as to why you don't do scrutiny more often with more participants from all your constituents, and what will this review that's happening now do to improve that? Because I'd certainly like to be involved in any review.
Yeah. So in terms of the scrutiny sessions we have now, they are in reaction to feedback from Councillor Oates. That was probably 18 months ago. So you're right to say that historically scrutiny sessions were less frequent. They are now annually based on the feedback from Councillor Oates. We're always open to reacting to feedback and improving, and we can consistently prove that we show that we've done that. In terms of why you've not been invited to this, I don't know. We have nothing to hide, and those who have nothing to hide nothing. But yeah, more than happy to review them. We are currently going through a assurance framework review, so more than happy to put your feedback into that and look at how we do it differently or more frequently going forward. And again, from my perspective, more than happy to take correspondence from any councillor about any aspect of the LEP at any point in time. You don't need to wait for a scrutiny session.
Thank you. That's really good to hear. I would like to be involved in your review if that's possible, just yeah. As a constituent of one of the districts and boroughs of the LEP. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but as I say, we are an open book. I'm more than happy to take any question from anybody at any time. You don't have to wait.
Thank you, Councillor McKiernan. One from the floor, we've got County Councillor Tina Clements.
Thank you, Chair. You've asked us to note in the recommendations about wider uncertainty around the SSLEP. Yeah. Can you give us some background on that? Because I'm not au fait with everything that's in the document. I've read it and I've took it in, but it's the first time I've been at this committee for this. So if you can just give us some information and some background on why, if and when we should be worried. And Sheila has just asked the question about skills in young people and how important that is for our youngsters to be able to obtain the right skills in the right places.
Yeah, so second question about skills in young people. First question is about the history of the LEP review, yeah? Okay, so if I do them in the order you asked them. So in terms of the LEP review, there has been, the government has always made sure that there is consistent scrutiny at the top level in terms of what LEPs are and their form and function. And I've been involved in the LEP for probably 3.5, 4 years, and I've been through at least 2 reviews, so they're almost every 18 months. LEPs are very much connected to the national political agenda in many ways. So in terms of where funding from BAYS, MHCLG goes into a local area, so we are very much connected to the national political agenda. There's been historically lots of interest in making sure that scrutiny, because large sums of money goes through LEPs, and there's been lots of thoughts about that in the past and lots of focus around scrutiny around that kind of stuff and governance. In the last but one to the in the statement in the in terms of the budget in spring 2021, that was the first time that capital funds weren't allocated into LEPs for distribution to a local area. Pre that, capital funds have been allocated to LEPs in various programs, such as GBF in the previous autumn budget, and that was the first one in my period of tenure, or in my knowledge, where LEPs weren't given capital funds. And it's at that time that announced there would be a review. So the implication could be that capital funds would no longer be distributed into local areas through LEPs. They might be distributed directly into local areas, and schemes such as Levelling Up and Community Renewal Funds were applied for directly by local authorities, rather than local authorities working with LEPs for the distribution of those funds. So that's where the implication is in terms of how capital might be allocated and distributed locally. And at that time, the government said that they would review our form and function, and the implication therefore is we haven't had capital funds in the last budget either. And the implication is therefore that before they start to reallocate capital funds through a LEP, they want to understand the roles of LEPs in a local area. So I think if I could extrapolate that for you, I think what we're saying is that at the moment capital funds from government pots are to be bid from locally by local authorities, and therefore that's something you need to make, you need to be aware of, that your local authorities are bidding efficiently and proactively to make sure you get allocation of funds here, and that isn't something you look towards a LEP for in the short term. And long term, that may or may not come back to LEPs, but there are also revenue funds, which are currently the ERDF funds. The replacement for those is called the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and it's not been decided how those will be allocated. So in the future, they may come back through LEPs or they may not. It's about making, I think from your perspective as a councillor, it's about making sure you're clear where your local authorities are looking for their funds in terms of capital and revenue in economic development, and that they're being chased up properly. I think that hopefully answers your question. And then your second question was about skills in young people. So again, as a LEP, we've wanted to make sure that we represent our major educational establishments well, and that's why we have the Vice Chancellor of both Keele and Stafford Uni represented on our board. The Vice Chancellor of Stafford University chairs our skills panel, and there's a skills advisory panel where we take we have budget from government to run surveys and create data that identifies the skills needs in the area, and then we look at that then to build strategy around skills investment should be directed locally. So we've been involved in many programs and supporting people such as Keele and NSCG for the recent IoT and things like that. So we're involved in many of those areas, and also around the Capital Skills Equipment Fund, which has gone into many colleges across the area through South Staffs and all the various colleges. We allocate those capital funds as part of the Skills Equipment Fund as well. I think what's interesting in terms of the work we did in our local industrial strategy was identifying, again, for young people, again, the LEBS also has accountability for the Careers and Enterprise Company, and making sure that we are understanding the types of career that are available to our young people, and making sure that we're signposting and creating those links into employability for young people, and also between business and local skills provision to create those pathways for people. So hopefully that answers your question, gives you some examples.
Okay, with that, Councillor Clements. Can I ask a question about how you deal with the diversity of the amount of businesses in the county, Stoke and the county? Obviously, you mentioned about the private sector representation. You've got 12 private sector members, but you've also mentioned 2 places are taken up by the universities, 1 by the Chamber of Commerce. Bearing in mind the diversity in terms of large businesses, small businesses, those involved with the old-fashioned logistics and overall type work as compared to IT-based, and those that are sort of very low-tech and those that are very high-tech. How do you form that representation, and how do you deal with communicating with all those different businesses?
So I'm just making notes to make sure I answer your question properly. So, as part of the local industrial strategy, we did a lot of detailed analysis around the types of businesses we have in our area. And our economy is quite interesting in that it is very, very diverse. That makes it interesting in terms of picking a number of key industries to get behind, because actually there's probably 8 or 9. It's not like you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 in this area. But also that is particularly useful because when it comes to economic shocks, they can be distributed evenly across a larger number of sectors, or if a particular sector takes it more than another, I feel that gives us a lot more resilience. In terms of the types of industries, the largest employer of people in our area is actually healthcare, so the care sector. The largest employer by GDP is the advanced manufacturing sector, and then you have lots of other sectors that fall behind that. Now, I think in terms of thinking about our diversity of businesses, I think it's interesting to think about the horizontals and the verticals. So you have those kind of traditional vertical industries, but then you think about logistics and IT, and it was good that you put them together, is that most modern types of businesses are now heavily reliant upon logistics. Most technology businesses, or lots of technology businesses, are also embedded in those. So Amazon being a really good example where they move businesses about, move boxes about. They're principally a technology-driven business. The technology in their warehouses is using lots of advanced algorithms, the way that they stack the shelves, the way they do the pick. So what you're seeing in our area now, and is that there are lots of industries which are being modernised, and digital is playing a horizontal and a vertical in all of those. And logistics is another good example where it's both a horizontal and a vertical for many of our industries. And we've been really at pains to make sure we've understood that, and also that we champion that approach around verticals as well as horizontals across most of our industries. So we are supporting businesses to make sure that they are advancing. And a good example will be where we supported recently ASOS, who are a fashion retailer, who have a large investment in technology, and also going to be making significant investments around automation in warehouses in the outskirts of Lichfield, where that really does show that confluence across those types of industry. In terms of, as you say, the low-tech and high-tech, one of the biggest challenges facing our economy locally, but also nationally, is the modernisation of business. And I think one of the side effects of the COVID pandemic has obviously been the increased mass consumption of technology, which has forced businesses to change their working practices. It's forced businesses to digitise much quicker. and we've obviously seen many businesses have actually been able to thrive through that because they've been forced to look at innovative business models. In terms of how we represent those, we try to make sure that at the board level we have representation from various industries. So we have people from, and again, Staffordshire is well known as a tourism and retail tourism and hospitality location, so we have representation from that sector. I run a very successful independent technology consultancy, so I represent the digital sector. We have people from land, and so lots of different people representing. So I try to keep that diversity across the private sector. And then in terms of the programs we have, again, we look at our vertical engagement through the Growth Hub, engagement through the Skills Advisory Panel, and all the programs we do to make sure that we are engaging in various, across the various sectors as well as we can. In terms of communicating with all those businesses, the communication actually falls principally through the Growth Hub, in terms of they are the front door to services locally, and we sit on the steering group, we chair that, and we are making sure that we give them direction to communicate across all those organisations. And you'll see in terms of our branding and the way we communicate, we try to create a voice that resonates with all those types of industry. So I hope that answers your question, Chair.
You mentioned about levelling up in one of the slides that you presented, and I just wondered, given that probably Stoke and Staffordshire would expect to benefit from levelling up, have you had any involvement in terms of any contribution of ideas towards that process? Have you been lobbying on behalf of the authorities?
So in terms of levelling up, we've been working with various MPs across the area to support them in the bids that they've been pulling together and supporting our partners. Principally, the levelling up bids and the CRF bids are created on behalf of MPs. So we've been supporting in that regard, but we are not being expected to come up with the ideas, more to provide the evidence base and support partners.
One more question from me in terms of the presentations that we've had, the various tables of spend. How easy is it to discern from this how much contribution has been from other bodies as opposed to the LEP? I always find it difficult to work out what would happen if the LEP wasn't there. Some of these projects, there's a contribution from the LEP, but there's also the counties and Stoke have got their own business liaison force. I know a lot of the districts and boroughs have got business coordination officers as well, and they're all trying to do the same thing of supporting business. So how can you discern what's the effect of the LEP as opposed to anybody else's contribution in maybe figurative terms, if it's a joint budget that's being worked on or a joint project that's being worked on?
Yeah, so typically the LEP funds will be used to underpin or kickstart a project, and then they'll be used to then leverage in funds from other parties. So I think, again, someone will keep me honest here, I think from memory, so someone will correct me a second, I think we've brought in about 300 million of funding over the last 10 years, and that has created a leveraged investment of about another 600 on top. Is that about right? That's about right. So basically a third of all the capital investment in the last 10 years wouldn't have happened without the LEP, and therefore going forward that additional leverage funding might not have come either. So something short of £1 billion worth of capital investment as a consequence of the LEP's involvement over 10 years.
Do you ever present the figures in the respect of where you're jointly working on another project with another body?
Yeah, so our board meeting and board meeting minutes are available publicly, as are the appraisals for our projects, and in our annual report we break that down as well. So yeah, it's available, and it's shared multiple times through a year. There are 10 touch points in terms of our exec board, where this data is openly discussed and minuted in the public domain, and obviously it's in our performance annual performance review reports as well, in our annual review. tell you, it's available frequently.
Okay. Got a question on the screen from Councillor Stephen Furnell. Stephen, you're muted. Just,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask about the change to being a company limited by guarantee. If you could just very briefly tell me why that was done, and also has it made any difference? Has it made it easier for you to deliver on projects, or harder, or not really made much difference at all? Thanks.
are you happy with that question?
Of course I'm happy for any question from anybody. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Farrell. So, in terms of the change to company by guarantee, that was principally, I believe, again, as part of the 2019 review, I believe, that was principally done to strengthen governance and accountability. What the government wanted to do is to make sure that the decisions that board directors made, they were legally accountable for them. The board directors are unelected representatives, and therefore from an accountability perspective, there needed to be some strengthening in that regard, and therefore making us liable as company directors was about strengthening that governance. In terms of delivering projects, it hasn't made anything particularly easier or harder either. It's more been about accountability and governance. And in that regard, it has made things easier because it's clear to people that the decisions we make, we are absolutely legally and personally accountable for them, which I think has helped with governance and decision making.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, another question from me then. Could I ask about how you feel you're comparing to maybe other LEPs? I presume you compare notes with other LEPs in terms of the partnership working. Do you feel that you've got the world on your side, as it were? Do you have a good relationship with partners as far as you can compare?
Thank you, Chair. Everything's always about improving. During my tenure, I've put significant effort in to build relationships with all partners and all districts across the area. We meet frequently with the leadership of all of our districts across the county and across the city. And we put significant effort into making sure that we're listening and we're communicating with them. So I believe my side of the story, there's always two sides in a relationship, but my belief is that we've significantly improved the partnership working, we've significantly improved communications, and we're, as you can see from this session, we are completely transparent and open about everything we do. So I believe we have significantly improved partnership working. Could it be better? Everything could be better every day, and we continue to look to improve as we go. I think the uncertainty around roles and futures makes that more difficult at the moment. We're looking forward to that uncertainty being removed so that we can get on with our programme with vigour and passion again. But I believe that we are working well. In terms of other LEPs, they are all kind of cast roughly in the same manner, but then there's lots of local variation. I think in terms of the dynamism we provide as a LEP, I think in terms of comparatively based on our performance reviews, we are performing significantly better than we used to be. So in terms of our annual performance reviews, we wouldn't always get good or for strategy, governance and delivery, and we now do. So we are now, as a LEP, in terms of how we're managed in our annual performance reviews, we are absolutely comparable to other LEPs, but that is not true historically pre-2019 and pre my tenure, but it is now. And obviously we engage with peer reviews with other LEPs. So yeah, sorry about that. Thank you, Simon.
You do have another microphone if you wanted to speak. Okay. Councillor McKiernan has another question.
Hello, this isn't a planned question, it's just something that arose out of the discussion you were saying about the largest industries. One of the largest workforces, I suppose, not workforces, but geographically across Staffordshire is the rural economy and farming. And I was just wondering how the LEP can help with access to grants, for instance, as a result of the changes from Brexit, or encouraging tourism, you know, people putting yurts on their lands, or even rewilding. I'm saying this as a trustee of a small charity that's benefited from the Growth Hub. We found, even though as a charity we're not a money-making enterprise as such, but they've given us a lot of advice, and the peer network we found really helpful. But they've also given us access to interns, for instance, at local universities. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts in that direction.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. So I think you were helping me answer the question there. So yeah, our various programmes, as you said, through the Growth Hub, we don't discriminate. We look to support all businesses, including rural businesses. And as you said, the peer network is also a LEP programme, so we fund that too. So those are two really good examples. Thank you for that, in the ways that we support rural businesses. We've contributed to the local rural strategy. We're engaged with the NFU. So I believe we are engaging and supporting that. As I say, it's a very diverse economy, so I can't say that we are, you know, it's very hard to pick winners here because you've got to support everything, so that means we are spread thin across a wide variety, but I do believe that we support the rural economy.
So, okay, Councillor McKiernan?
Thank you. That, yes, to say it was just a thought.
Okay. I should point out we're in the council chamber here in Stafford, and I mentioned earlier about the 4 pillars, and one of the 4 pillars is agriculture. So as I got pointed out when I first came to see this building, we've got the 4 industries of Staffordshire, including agriculture. The one question that I suppose I should ask quite cheekily, if you like, is that because there's a review going on about the future of LEPs, have you any aspirations of what you think might come out of it, or what you would hope would come out of that review?
Thank you, Chair. So, I need to pick language. I believe that we make a significant contribution, and I believe that we have made a valuable and important contribution to support businesses and represent businesses locally. Selfishly, and speaking personally, it's not really important. The most important thing is that we get the right outcome for businesses, the right outcome for our people, and the right outcome for our citizens of this area, and that we drive the economy that drives prosperity for our citizens and our employees and our employers. And in that regard, I almost don't mind how the review ends up, as long as this area ends up in a better position to drive economic growth that drives wealth and prosperity to our residents. It almost doesn't matter. I believe that we can have a significant role, and we should have a significant role to drive that, and I believe that we have the skills, the passion, the capability to do it, but it almost doesn't matter. The most important thing to me personally is the economic contribution to this area for our citizens and the wealth of the people who live and work here.
Okay, any view about size of the LEP? Because I'm probably from a previous era where I remember things like Advantage West Midlands and forerunners of LEP, and whether you've got any views on how that might play out.
I think it'd be foolish to speculate. Everything's up in there. Everything's on, up for discussion at the moment. As a LEP, we run it with a lean and mean team. We subcontract most of our services currently. So we are comparable if you add in all the subcontracted services to other LEPs. But at the moment, it's all up for discussion, and it would be wrong to speculate.
Okay, no other questions have indicated. I'll ask one more from myself. Because of the relationship you've got with the universities, how do you feel the level of skills are in the county and in Stoke? I know that it's one of the things that's often complained about, that we haven't got the right skills in the right industries and right people for the vacancies. Do you have any views on how that can be improved?
If you just allow me a moment to reflect. So I think, thinking potentially personally, but maybe in the role of lecturer as well, the changes driven by the pandemic have meant that lots of the skills challenges that the economy faced over a longer term period have just been accelerated and exacerbated. and I think that those skills challenges are being felt equally across most industries, across the whole area. So I'm not sure that there is a particular position where you can say that the universities are under or over or not contributing enough. I think the whole economy is feeling skills challenges. In my own business, we have over 40 jobs available today for people who live around here. We just can't find people for them. We know nationally that all businesses are struggling to recruit people, and even where there are people available, it's a skills issue, where those people have the skills for employability. So I'm not sure that there's a local, particularly local flavour to the problem. I do believe that both of our universities are contributing. They are well engaged with the LEP. They are working with us around the skills advisory panel to make sure that they are understanding the needs of the economy. But I think, again, this is an economy that is changing very quickly and has very diverse needs. And from an employer's perspective, the staff and skill shortage is felt across pretty much all industries and quite severely. So I hope that answers your question, Chair.
Okay, we'll take any questions that any others have got, including the other observers. We've had a couple of the observers speak, but if they wish to comment, please do. Or I'll take any other questions from the floor. I suppose the other one that I will ask is in terms of accountability. You mentioned about scrutiny on an annual basis,
yeah,
which is obviously somewhat limited to the two formats that we've got, either through Staffordshire County or through Stoke-on-Trent and the local authorities. Do you have any means of being accountable to the public in general? Do you do anything in the way of questionnaires? Is there anything on your website in terms of consistent feedback that you're asking for?
So as part of engagements with the Growth Hub, obviously we look for feedback through that. So in terms of delivery of our services, there are opportunities for users of our services to provide feedback. In terms of transparency, our website is a rich source of information around all of our programs, all of our spend, and all of the projects. So I believe we are transparent and open to that. In terms of feedback, we could reflect on if there are other channels. I think the issue we often have is around engagement, and obviously to make any kind of scrutiny or feedback worthwhile, you need to make sure that there is engagement to drive that. So we need to balance the opportunity for people to be able to do something compared to those that will give us feedback. But yeah, we'd happily go and look at that, Chair. Yeah, we are very much engaged on social media. We have an open conversation with the public, with business. I believe there is opportunity for people to hold us to account and provide feedback, but we can go and reflect on that.
Okay. No other indications of speakers either from the floor or through the screen. So can I thank you for attending on what has been a particularly bad day for weather. I've certainly travelled across the county. I've been Lichfield, Tamworth, Cannock and Stafford today, so I've seen the best and the worst of Staffordshire today in terms of weather. So thank you for travelling, everybody, and I'll conclude the meeting.
Thank you, Chair, and on behalf of the LEP team, thanks for your time today. Thanks for your questions, everybody. Thank you.